Hello, everyone. It's great to see you for another week. I hope you're all doing well. As you might be able to see if you're looking at a video format of this podcast or episode, I am on location, which honestly doesn't mean a whole lot because if you know anything about me, I've been a digital nomad for the last 2.5 years, so I'm kind of always on location. But today I'm actually at a place called Hogwarts in the UK, which is where a bunch of AI researchers kind of live and hang out and visit fairly often. I'm just passing through for a couple of nights, but today was a filming day, and I was like, yeah, let's see, this makes sense to film here and have it on theme a bit. So if you have my newsletter, what I'm talking about today is actually the topic of the last newsletter. I'm going to be talking about Jack Clark's speech at Oxford University. If you hear wind rustling behind me, please don't mind that. You might hear sheep in the background. There's actually a sheep paddock right here. Um, it's doing wonders for my mental health, so hopefully it does wonders for you too. Before I get into the content for today, very quickly, please do like and subscribe. It really helps. The channel is almost at 1,000, which is really delightful. I always wanted to have this, medium to be able to publish free AI security content for people who might not otherwise be able to, for example, take my AI security fundamentals course. I also have Medium blogs too, but yeah, commenting, liking definitely helps support this channel, so please do that. And let us know if there's anything you'd specifically like to hear about as well. I'm always keen to talk about topics that interest you. But the reason that I wanted to talk about Jack Clark's lecture today is because his email newsletter is probably one of my favorites, and it's the one that I've followed for the longest. So I started following it ages ago before I was really into the AI thing, and I didn't actually realize who he was because Jack Clark is a co-founder of Anthropic. He used to be head of policy, policy lead at OpenAI. He also used to be a journalist specifically on AI at Bloomberg. And the email newsletter that I was referring to is Import AI. I really like it because it seems pretty balanced to me. It's often quite a varied take on different news headlines, his own personal thoughts, and there's always a science fiction story in there too that kind of deconstructs and highlights a potential narrative scenario of the future. It's not meant to be spicy. Like, it's not necessarily the case that he is concerned that those certain outcomes might happen, but they're always really interesting thought experiments. So I recommend signing up to that newsletter. And so this week, basically, his newsletter was an essay of his talk at Oxford. And I thought it was really interesting. Does that any of that sound surprising to anyone here? Yeah, no, I think we can easily say that that's probably the status quo. A core theme as well is that AI is not just a normal technology. It's not just like the advent of the internet or other kinds of labor-saving technologies. He says that those technologies are usually improving only one domain. They're constrained by human scaling, organizational bottlenecks, and expertise shortages, and that AI improves science itself, coding, optimization, research, like all of those things that actually then recursively kind of have a sort of autonomous loop back into creating new things like novel work, novel research, new products. And in that way, AI is different than other things because once AI reaches a certain capability level, it can improve itself and improve the science that underpins it, so that even things that are considered really challenging scientific problems in AI development, it can eventually solve itself because it can act as its own researcher. So really what it's saying is that AI may become capability that autonomously improves capability. There are a few examples he references. So he gives the example of bar exam performance. This is significant because legal reasoning historically is viewed as very human. However, models now are unexpectedly capable of textual reasoning, applying abstract patterns, and those capabilities emerged through scaling. They weren't explicitly engineered. So it's not like someone developed a model specifically to be able to do like the bar exam. It's just that as models became bigger, they became more capable And suddenly that property for them to do the bar exam emerged, even if they were not explicitly trained to do that. He also lists a few other examples. For example, the International Mathematical Olympiad problems. He gives those specific examples because they're concrete problems you can ask an AI to do, and you know if they're going to be right or wrong. So it's a way of benchmarking them, especially on advanced mathematics like advanced reasoning, abstraction, multi-step planning, and formal symbolic capability. All of that's really important to the security intersection too, because math is very strongly connected to cryptography, optimization, scientific reasoning, and exploit development. And again, that's an example of something that has a capability that's emerged through scalability, not because it was actually explicitly trained to do this. Vulnerability discovery and coding capability are examples of this too. So AI is automating coding, and that automates the digital system production itself. So the broader point here is that these are not separate breakthroughs, but that they're manifestations of one rapidly scaling, underlying capability trend. So he describes frontier models as more grown than made. Again, going back to this point of the bigger these models get, the more they can do. And they're not deterministic software engineering. Instead, this behavior emerges during training. The internal representations, which basically means the ways that AI like brains look, if you imagine all of their connected neurons and synapses and how decisions are made at different layers, all of that isn't really well understood, especially because these models are so big. Like there are techniques we can use for smaller models to understand like where they learn stuff. How in the brain, for example, we know which region of the brain is responsible for my ability to remember things, my ability to speak, my ability to breathe. You can kind of do that in smaller models, but as models scale up, it's a lot harder to do that, especially because they don't necessarily map to the ways that we would understand learning and knowledge in humans. And because there's no reliable way to test them. Even with human brains, we can understand to an extent, like a broader pattern of how understanding works. We can't necessarily say this neuron does this thing. That's quite hard. One of the most important concepts in his lecture was this idea of recursive self-improvement. So his analogy is like a 3D printer printing a better version of itself. So applied to AI, it's about AI systems improving their successor systems. And this changes things because traditional progress bottlenecks like human cognition, researcher scarcity, experimentation speed, organizational scaling, AI-assisted R&D compresses those bottlenecks. So this research can happen much faster. This capability can emerge much faster than people are used to. Even hearing about Jack's work inside Anthropic is really interesting. Like, we don't always get to hear unfiltered stories. And I know that his story is obviously filtered. It's not quite an unfiltered story, but for example, I know a lot of people who work at Anthropic and AI, and they're really scared to talk very openly about it. A lot of the time that's for a legitimate reason. Like they might get a bit anxious that researchers are trying to learn how OpenAI and Anthropic do certain things. Maybe they're talking to people who are quite anti-lab, so they're just a little bit cautious. Look, a lot of AI safety people I work with really have bad opinions of the labs. They consider them doing evil things. And so a lot of the people that I know at those kinds of labs really don't feel confident to just talk about what their experience is like. But Jack obviously is senior enough that he doesn't have that fear. And so he gives quite a benign but interesting story about how, 5 years into his time at Anthropic, he finally took a significant period of leave, and that was for his parental leave. So he had a baby, he goes away for a bunch of time, and then he comes back, and there was really significant changes inside Anthropic. He said that basically the company workflows fundamentally changed. So while he was away, they were developing Opus 4.6, and he'd obviously experimented and tinkered with a little bit. Even while he was on leave, he was practicing doing stuff. Just like with all of the previous model versions, he'd experimented himself with them. But he found that something really fundamental happened with this new model, which was released, within the last few months. He said that employees increasingly delegate work to Claude. they only supervise outputs. They don't actually do the thing themselves. There's a lot more emphasis on orchestrating workflows. So that's, it's kind of similar to process automation from 5-10 years ago. But in AI land, it just means that you are setting up an automation workflow, but the AI has a lot more autonomy to be able to, for example, produce email responses, or increased ability to use tools to do things like write to file, or understand how, if it's working in a customer or marketing setting, for example, it can just take a bit more liberty to understand what's going on. So those workflows being orchestrated by humans, and having teams of agents, he said, were really common. And then humans were more focused on validating results. He said that some engineers were barely coding directly anymore. He said it was all supervisory. And depending on the kinds of roles that you have, you might resonate with this. Like I certainly do. Thank God I don't have to do so much hands-on stuff anymore, but no one in my team does. Most of the time we're managing agents now. And that's really easy for us to do. We're a startup and we work in the training space, so it's not really super high risk. But it's quite challenging for bigger organizations to do this. And the reason that an organization like Anthropic can is because not only does it have really good understanding of how those models work, but they're obviously motivated to build their organization around being able to use those kinds of tools. So Jack really talks about humans as the verification layer. He says that humans increasingly are moving into verification, oversight, orchestration, and trust evaluation instead of direct production. This matters a lot for security. Verification scales very poorly. So some potential risks are audit fatigue. You have so many audits, you just get sick of that being your job. Rubber stamping, where the human isn't meaningfully engaged in the process. They're just kind of there to rubber stamp something without actually checking it properly. Automation bias, so assuming that because an output has come from an automated system, it must be right. Hidden vulnerabilities, so just not being able to detect small code vulnerabilities, and the inability to meaningfully review outputs. If you don't know how the sausage is made, it's really hard to review the sausage itself. There's got to be a better analogy for that, but that's just what first came to my mind. So even Jack said that Anthropic increasingly resembles an ecology filled with agents, which is really, really interesting. He says that there are real risks when the current tooling isn't designed for agent ecosystems, autonomous coordination, emergent machine behavior, and semantic attacks, machine-generated workflows. I think it's interesting that he said this because often, as I've mentioned before, there can be a bit of a disconnect between safety and security fields, but here is a really clear intersection of a safety and a security problem. One thing I also think was quite interesting that Jack went into was the problem of incentives, especially as someone who founded Anthropic. Actually talking about incentive structures can get quite tricky when you're one of those labs or a very big organization, because as much as Anthropic brands themselves as the safety first lab, they still have to consider their market pressures, considering the competitive pressures from other labs, even the pressure of being, based in the United States and being subject to the laws and requirements of the United States versus other countries and what that geopolitical climate entails. So he was keen to focus on how AI can be used for good. He was absolutely someone who was optimistic about the future of AI. He said that AI provides productivity gains, synthetic labor, smaller high output teams, accelerated R&D, and economic dominance, which could lead to some really great outcomes for humanity, healthcare, being able to create better jobs instead of just more jobs. He is really positive about it, but he also has some predictions that are a bit that he considers kind of concerning as well, especially when he imagines that you might have what we'd consider currently a human-based corporation, but you'd have it made up of just tens of thousands of agents. What does that look like, and how do we consider that? He also calls out the concern that AI is increasingly viewed as national security infrastructure. It's a cyber capability multiplier, it's an economic weapon, and it can be used for military advantage. And no major actor wants to slow unilaterally or lose their strategic position. So he compares it to the nuclear race or the cyber arms race and even the space race. So his focus is not necessarily on, being anti-AI or thinking about AI doom, but it's more about the speed of governance versus capability. So he's not worried about, for example, things like robots going evil. He's more concerned about runaway optimization, where AI optimizes on a proxy that isn't accurate, or in line with the designer's intentions. And then it accelerates so quickly that we can't contain it, that we have an inability to slow systems, we have a loss of oversight, and then we have a massive governance failure. He does say explicitly that he's concerned that AI could plausibly kill everyone, um, and that dismissing this possibility is irresponsible. But his broader concern is also systemic. It's more that, these systems are becoming too economically useful, too geopolitically important, too operationally embedded to meaningfully pause. I think that's interesting because some of the people who live here, for instance, work with Pause AI, which is an organization that's global. But I mean, here in the UK, it focuses very much on wanting to pause the development of highly capable AI systems so that our governance measures can basically catch up. And this is a pretty controversial take. Like, a lot of people believe that the idea of pausing AI is kind of dangerous. So, for example, I'm very pro AI regulation. I believe that we must regulate AI. What it means to regulate AI is very different for different people, though. So, for example, I believe that we must have, some kind of mandated incident reporting. There must be mandated accountability measures. We must be considering things like transparency, bias, um, security of AI, and that all of those things are not optional for organizations. Whenever I say that at conferences, people can get really offended. They're like, oh, but we must use AI to innovate. And I think innovation with AI is not the same as regulating AI. Like, one doesn't preclude the other. And in fact, do you want your children's images to be used in nude AI generated deepfakes? No, regulate AI. But the idea of actually pausing AI is a whole other thing, right? It's not just about making sure that we're investing in regulation, but it's a global pause. It's asking the labs to just stop and somehow enforcing that by legal measures. So that's really hard. Like, that's a very, very hard thing to do, even if they say that according to statistics, over 60% of people in the general public would be in support of something like that. A lot of researchers are. So it's an interesting question because I guess the difference is whether that would be an ideal state or whether that's actually a plausible thing we can do in this current climate. And what is the thing that is more effective to spend our energy advocating for? So Jack's take on that is that if we're thinking about the next few years in AI and what might happen, here's what he says. He believes that by 2028, AI will be materially impacting biology. There'll be AI originating Nobel Prize level discoveries, autonomous companies, AI generated successor systems, synthetic labor economies, and machine driven scientific acceleration. That's very soon. So, whether these timelines are correct, whether the 2028 date that he gives is correct, is less important than the fact that Frontier Labs think that this is probably what's going to happen. This certainly aligns with most of the people I speak to in AI safety. And therefore, this shapes deployment, investment, hiring, governance, safety, posture, and strategic competition. So there are some clear security takeaways. He does mention them, but I'll lean into them a little bit more. So AI security is increasingly a governance problem. It's an observability problem. It's a systems engineering problem. It's an institutional adaptation problem, and it's an incentive alignment problem. It's not just about adversarial machine learning. It's not just about prompt injection. Thinking about how to make sure that security is actually part of not just our organizations, but an approach considered in our societies and by the kinds of organizations that like that need to, but might not otherwise be thinking about it, is really, really important from a civilizational perspective too. So I do recommend you go watch the lecture. Sign up to his newsletter. It's very, very good. I mean, it doesn't like it's not very Anthropic specific. Which I mean to say is if you're concerned that he might be kind of biased towards Anthropic, that is not a read that I had from reading his newsletter. It seems very, very balanced. And let me know in the comments if there's anything in particular along this thread that you're interested in, or any discussions that you're interested to have with other people in the channel as well. I think it's really interesting. It's also really interesting because I think Mythos was maybe a turning point, because as someone who works exclusively with cybersecurity people, but who networks with AI safety people, there's really never been much overlap until Mythos happened. And then suddenly, security people are thinking about the implication of those very capable models, and safety people are thinking about their impact in cybersecurity. So I think that's a really good thing, because finally we have two groups of people talking to each other who might not have otherwise been talking. But all that's to say, it means that I'm suddenly talking a lot more with, I guess, the safety communities here in the UK, and they're certainly bigger than like the AI security specific communities. I'm also going to be at EAG this weekend. So Effective Altruism Global, they have these big conferences every year. And I know I've mentioned before, a lot of my AI safety network got into it through Effective Altruism, which I kind of learned about after already being in AI security, because I came into it through cybersecurity. But it's really interesting to see in EA circles the discussion about AI-related cybersecurity getting a lot more attention now, which I think is a good thing. But if you're a cybersecurity professional who's maybe a bit skeptical about EA and AI safety, all I can say is like they want to hear from you, they want to learn from you. There's a lot of conversations to be having at this intersection that everyone kind of wants to have. It's just that everyone's probably speaking slightly different language. So if you're around the UK, you're going to be there, then do let me know. But otherwise, again, thank you for being here. Let me know what else you want to hear. Please do like and subscribe, pop any messages below, and I'll see you next time.